had all three mafteches, and then months later, this is in Tashin Yud Aleph. I think the first sikh was Purim, the second sikh was Bistamas. The Rebbe went back to it and was Taka Mazber Alpi Nigle, how it is that by the Rabbeim they had all three mafteches. But along the same lines, the idea that the Rebbe said that the Rabbeim knew their time exactly, even though the Gemara says not. So the Rebbe told Rabbi Yoel to stay, and Rabbi Yoel stayed. And the Maaseh says it's Taka Apela. Rabbi Yoel was a boy of 20. When he got here, there was a whole establishment of Chazrim. There were people twice his age, more than twice his age, who were Chazim Bam Friedrich and Rebbe. I'm not talking about the Rebbe. I'm talking about Rabbi Mentlik and Rabbi Tenenbaum. And Mistama, Avi Kulam was a Chazir by the name of Harav Shmuel Zalmanov. You remember him, Mistama. Harav Shmuel Zalmanov, you remember him? He was an extraordinary man. He was a Mitzuyin Dike Yid. His mamish, he was like a member of the family by the Rebbe, by the Friedrich Rebbe. He would go in Erev Yom Kippur with his wife and his son for Birchas Abonim, like a mamish of family member. Reb Shmuel Zalmanov, he left to Eretz Yisrael before I was born, so I don't remember the Shmuel Zalmanov. My father had talked to me about Shmuel Zalmanov's davening, tefillah, but the Shmuel Zalmanov was a big chassid, in the Madrega of earlier generations. He was an Adam Gadol. He was one of the most important people, mamish, in making the Rebbe. He was very instrumental, and he was young. He wasn't younger than the Tmimim from Lubavitch, but he was an Adam Gadol. They were all chazrim. These people all went into the Sichas of Friedrich and Rebbe, and they would go downstairs and they would chazer. By the Friedrich and Rebbe, you have to remember, they didn't let the Bachrim in. By the Friedrich and Rebbe, they didn't let the Bachrim in because of the Rebbe's health. They had to very carefully control the air in the room that the Friedrich Rebbe was in. Thank you very much. So they didn't let the Bachrim in. So the Seder was, and our Rebbe was mishtatif in this, our Rebbe himself, that the Friedrich Rebbe had a tish. Every Shabbos was a tish. Friday night, Shabbos day, and every tish was a fabrengen. Sometimes he said more, sometimes he said less. Right after the Suda, they would go downstairs to upstairs on this floor, right, where you make your Sheva brachas. And they would chazer for the Bachrim. The Bachrim waited, or they came back, whatever it was, and they would chazer. The Rebbe sometimes would participate. If the Rebbe felt like there was nobody else to give over the words of the Friedrich Rebbe, he did it himself. B'chlal, the Rebbe used to sit on the side. He didn't. If there was nobody else to do it, if they missed something or they made a mistake, the Rebbe would correct them. This was a normal seder. That the Rebbe, they would come downstairs after the Sudas every Shabbos and every Yom Tov and repeat the Sichas. And there were people who did it, and they had good heads, I promise you. The Rebbe's fabrengens were very different than the Friedrich Rebbe's fabrengens. I'm sure part of it to do with the health of the Rebbe. But they say, I never met them, but they say a lot of things. They say, this Zay is pretty reliable, this is a very reliable Zay. That the Friedrich Rebbe wrote very arichistic, he wrote very detailed, very elaborately, but he spoke very concisely. His words, the chosen words, the spoken words, are very bekitzer. And by the Rebbe was the other way around. The Rebbe's writing is so concise, you have to study it like a Tosfos, like a Maram Shif. Every word is measured by the Rebbe. But his style of speech is very, very generative, very elaborate, very even repetitive. And they say that by the Rogatchover was the same thing. That the Rogatchover's writing was very concise, and his speech was very understandable. When you read the Rogatchover's writings, the whole thing is code. You need a computer to decipher it. But they say as that Geret, when he explained something, but Dibur, it was very easy to understand. So even when the Rebbe was healthy, the Friedrich Rebbe, had to Geret bekitzer, his speech was brief. And I heard from people who worked on the Sichas that very often they would bring a Hanocha, a typed transcript of the Friedrich Rebbe, said the whole thing was a page. Because in a Fabrengen he would speak for 2 minutes, and he would stop, they would sing a nig and speak 2 minutes. He would take a pen, just X out the entire page, turn it over, and start writing. And he could write 20 pages. Mamish. In other words, what he said in a page, so now when they print the Friedrich Rebbe Sichas, they print the page that he crossed out also. They print, because this is how he said it, this is how he spoke. And very often in those pages where they're writing what the Friedrich Rebbe said, you have corrections from our Rebbe. The Rebbe would make Hagos. Our Rebbe would make corrections on how the Friedrich Rebbe spoke. Yoel Kahn shows up, and Nistemu Mayan Achayzim. It's a remarkable thing. The Rebbe used to speak for hours. Hours! In the first year, the Fabrengens, I think, were shorter. The Rebbe didn't Fabreng till 4 o'clock in the morning, but he Fabreng very often. That first year, that interim year between the Friedrich Rebbe's Estalkos and the Rebbe's Kabbalas and CS, when the Rebbe did not accept the leadership officially, he was verbringing als Ramash. He was verbringing als an Edom. He was verbringing as a son-in-law. He verbringed very, very often, almost every Shabbos. That year he verbringed a lot. Once he became a Rebbe officially, he actually started verbringing much less, only Shabbos Mevorchim. And the Shabbos Mevorchim verbringings were very short, except for the Maimer, which could be close to an hour. And then Yom Tif, Pesach, Yud Kislev, Yud Shvat, Purim, Yud Beis Tammuz, Chof Av, and then Rosh Hashanah, Simchas Torah, Motzei Pesach, and Motzei Shavuos. And that's pretty much it. Maybe I like Beimer and Angevor from Chayil. The Rebbe didn't verbring more than 20 times a year. And 12 of them are Shabbos Mevorchim. Verbring is not that frequent. So the Shabbos Mevorchim verbringings were very short, except for the Maimer. The Yom Tov verbring edition could be extremely long. It was normal in the 50s and the early 60s for the Rebbe verbring till 5, 6 in the morning. Then it was shortened based on a request from Chassidim because of the Rebbe's health to 3 o'clock in the morning. And I remember the tail end of that before Lamed Ches. After Lamed Ches, 3 o'clock in the morning became 1 o'clock in the morning. That's in later years the Rebbe verbring less, but he also started verbring more frequently. But that first year the Rebbe verbring very, very often. And all these chavas sat by the Chazorah. Rabbi Mentlik was there, Rabbi Tenenbaum was there, Rabbi Shmuel Zalmanov was there, and no one said a word. This 20-year-old boychikl, this Yoel Kahn, showed up out of nowhere, and he was so much better than them. There was Poshet no Tfisis Mokum. It's Poshet Apella. You're talking about Emes Chassidische Yidden who were deeply Mekushet. It's nicht Poshet. Rabbi Mentlik was Mekushet to the Rebbe's Lagazunza before the Rebbe passed away. So was Shmuel Zalmanov. They knew the Rebbe personally, and they had such derech eretz. The derech eretz that they had for the Rebbe was half of a fella. Rabbi Mentlik for 40 years didn't move a muscle next to the Rebbe. Mamish, he stood be'em of a fachad. Be'em of a fachad. And Shmuel Zalmanov was the same thing. These were real chassidim. Yoel Kahn was so good at it. And it was so easy for him. Mamish a tape recorder. And in those years, when I remember him when he was quote unquote an old man. I remember Reb Yoel from the Mems. Reb Yoel in the Mems was past 50. But when he was younger, his akkoden was maflet. His memory was impeccable. But the thing about Reb Yoel was he wasn't a tape recorder. His tfisa, the way he understood, the Rebbe wasn't telling stories. The Rebbe was speaking deep in Yonim. Deep in Yonim, Chassidus knew, okay, so somebody understands a little Chassidus. But deep in Yonim and Nigle, you had to know the whole Torah. It's vast as a sea. Before the Rebbe finished talking, Yoel had it figured out. Before the Sikha was over. Yoel already in his head constructed the Sikha, organized the Sikha, questions, explanation, answer, raya, first teretz, pirche, second teretz, pirche, final teretz. His head was so incredible. Reb Yoel Kahn, who yesterday was his Yom Haledes, he turned 95 years old. This morning last night I gave a class, so last night it was still his birthday, so I said, he showed up the day that when the Rebbe became a Rebbe, and he served the Rebbe, Kol Yomei Chayav. Kol Yomei Chayav he served the Rebbe. Everyone is nispal from his Shur Chassidus, which are extraordinary. Somebody just told me yesterday in Shul that his Rebbetzin, soll sein gesund und stark, Mrs. Kahn was a second cousin of the Rebbe's. Mrs. Kahn's mother, who was Butman, who was the Schneerson from home, was a first cousin of Reb Leivik, Hervas Meret. Mrs. Kahn's mother and Reb Leivik, their fathers were brothers. That's how close they were. So she was quite close to the Rebbetzin. She spent a lot of time with the Rebbetzin. And the Rebbetzin said to her once that your husband gives a shir chassidus, it's a leck in the finger, it's extraordinary. So when so her husband was very taken aback to hear that the Rebbetzin is listening and on the phone, because they started putting the shiurim on the phone. The Rebbetzin listened to the shiurim, and so she said to Mrs. Kahn, your husband get good to shir. And then she said, please take care of his health. That's your job. Make sure the lang gesund und stark, the leben lang. Rabbi Yoel was talking about Hashem Ma'adach Yomim. But in my mind, there's no question. The Rebbe told him, "Bis doch vor Deile u'mash kemeteres Rabbi Lacherim." Rabbi Yoel Kahn gave us the Rebbe's Torah. The Rebbe, and again as a Rebbe, there was never such a Rebbe like our Rebbe. There never was such a Rebbe. There never was such a Dor, a generation like our generation. They taught us on the one hand, and the opportunity of communication. The Rebbe received letters from the whole world all the time, and he had to deal with all of it. And the Rebbe was building Lubavitch. The Rebbe was building Lubavitch from the ground, from ashes. And the Rebbe had a vision of shlichus. And the truth is, this is a whole other conversation. I'm not an important person, but I have spoken to important people. And I've heard from people who were very close, extremely close, that the Rebbe's involvement in Shlichus was so detailed. Till Chav Zayin Oder Tavshin and Beis, the Rebbe was concerned about a small shliach in a small shtetl, and he was involved in decisions that you would think were way beneath him. The Rebbe was not in any way distant. Begoloi bechitzonius, it looked like the Rebbe was distanced. But behind the scenes, through Rabbi Chadakov and through Rabbi Krinsky, there were different channels, you know. The Rebbe was involved in every shliach who went on shlichus, in Tavshin Nun, in Tavshin Nalv, in Tavshin Beis, to the nitty gritty, to the kleine Einzelheiten. Rabbi Kotlarski, I know this. Okay, don't make me talk. Of course, Rabbi Kotlarski worked with Rabbi Chadakov. Rabbi Chadakov worked with the Rebbe, and the involvement was oisig extraordinary. And the Rebbe spoke Torah like no Rebbe. A Rebbe v'yunzer al Chabad, the Rebbe should speak so much Torah never was. And the pashtus hadover is, the simple hezbishab hadover is, our generation needed so much more than the other generation needed. The Rebbe never left 770. The Rebbeim all went away. The Rebbe never left 770. For 40 years he never left 770. Didn't lead the Dal Ramas. And I mean, the Rebbe didn't act like a Rebbe, he acted like a soldier. Soldiers on a vacation. Fartik, he wasn't the king, he was one of the soldiers. He was Melech Malchei Amlachim. But his Hanoge, the Rebbe was one of the guys. He was a soldier like any other. And the Rebbe spoke all this Torah, and he trusted a 20-year-old boychik. You know, the Reb Yoel came to the Rebbe. The Yitzhak was the first Maimed, yeah? A week later was his birthday. So he had a Yechidus. He turned 21 years old. So in Yechidus, so the Rebbe discussed with him about Limud HaNigle, and in Yechidus, he asked the Rebbe about the Maimed. The Rebbe, by the way, was very, very happy. The reason the Rebbe was very, very happy, we don't... Reb Yoel said to the Rebbe that he prepared the Sichos, and the Maimed vet Mestama Areis came Biksav. Mestama, the Rebbe is going to write the Maimed. The reason he said it to the Rebbe, because all the Rebbeim wrote their own Maimon. All the Rebbeim wrote their own Chassidus, except for the Alter Rebbe. They all wrote their own Chassidus. Now you must understand, when the Rebbeim wrote their own Chassidus, you know how they wrote? And Friedrich Rebbe wrote, he took a Maimed of his father, said copy from here to here, copy from here to here, copy from here to here, then he'd paste it together and add words. So he didn't write the whole Maimed. He created the Maimed based on an earlier text. We have two examples that are printed of the Rebbe quote starting to write a Maimed. We have two. The Maimed of Kitisa and the Maimed of Purim, Tavshin Yidalef. You could see the Rebbe starting to write the Maimed. But the Rebbe wasn't going to allow, he wasn't going to cut and paste. Mistam, if he had cut and paste, it would have been easier for him. But the Rebbe started to write in longhand. Anyway, so Rabbi Yoel said to the Rebbe, the Maimed Mistam Areis came Biksav. So the Rebbe said, was gedenkst nicht? You don't remember? So he tells the Rebbe, nicht book, not so good. So the Rebbe said, was genommen as Sach Mashke? You drank a lot. So the Rebbe finally said to him, du trag rein, what du kennst. You give me what you can, and I'll see what. Anyway, he saw. He saw, and that's how it stayed. For 20 years, there was Kemat no Hagor. For 20 years, almost no editing. The Rebbe trusted one person, Rabbi Yoel. And Rabbi Yoel used to communicate with the Rebbe. When the Rebbe said a Fabrengen, and Rabbi Yoel didn't understand, he would ask. And you know how he would sign his name? Yoel. I heard that Yudel also, Yudel Krinsky, used to write Yudel. He didn't write Yoel ben Yoel. And the Rebbe answered every question. He was the Rebbe's Torah. We have B'das Tachten because of Rabbi Yoel. And if they didn't understand, he would ask. And sometimes the Rebbe would get frustrated with him and write very, very critical notes, or notes that sound critical. How come he's not thinking? And if Rabbi Yoel didn't understand, he didn't get hurt by the strong words. He would ask again. I know this from people who worked with him. And until he understood, and then he would make the hanachas. Rabbi Yoel, the boy of 20 years old, you know. So I'm saying yesterday was his Yom Haledes. I'm talking about him. I just want to tell you one final story, and this has taken 14 minutes and 57 seconds too long. I started talking because I was setting up the machine, but the machine's not really running. When Reb Yoel Kahn was 4 years old, the Friedrich Rebbe sent the Rebbe to give him chocolate. I'll say that one more time. When Yoel Kahn was 4 years old, the Friedrich Rebbe sent the Rebbe to give him chocolate. I once told Rabbi Yoel this Maaseh, and he got so angry at me. You don't tell. He was really frustrated. It's a tzugit to the details. I didn't tell the story correctly. How do I know the story? Because Reb Yoel Kahn had a father. His name was Fol Nachman HaKoyen Kahn. Fol Kahn. Fol Kahn was not the brain. They say that the Reb Yoel's cup is from his mother. Fol Kahn was a very, very chassidish yid, but he wasn't a Gaon. Reb Yoel was a Gaon. It's his mother. I don't know who his mother was, but they say the cup comes from the mama. They say the Mesapri Lashon Hod. They was Reden. And I'm stupid enough to repeat it. Fol Kahn was a big Baal Meis. And by the way, for the record, Fol Kahn didn't write his stories either. You know who wrote his stories? His stories. His granddaughter. All the books, the first sefer of Chassidus Sipurim, Shmos Sipurim, don't tell anybody. It was written like we had last week in the Haftarah. Ki b'yad isha. His granddaughter was a very gifted writer. I forgot her married name. She was a daughter of, I think, of Reb Baruch Parish, who was a fellow Kanzanidim. And she wrote his Sfarim. He would tell stories and she wrote them. And she wrote beautifully and she wrote very chassidish. She didn't write modern, she wrote very chassidish. So he has storybooks. But then he has a little book on his own personal arrest and liberation. He describes himself being in Siberia. The last page of that book, it's a small little book, it's less well known, is leaving Russia. On the very, very last page, he describes how they left Russia as a family. It was either 34 or 35, Tzadidal and Tzadikei. And they went through Europe. And they found out that the Frierdiker Rebbe, they went through Austria. And they were in Vienna, and the Frierdiker Rebbe was in Perkesdorf, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong about the places, but the story is true. So Reb Fol Kahn had a wife and 4 children. He had 3 girls, they were older, and Reb Yoel was the youngest. So he left his family wherever they were, the hotel or the train station. They were en route, they were traveling to Eretz Yisrael. And he went to see the Frierdiker Rebbe by himself. And had a yechidus. I forgot what the Rebbe told him, I don't know if he writes it. But after the yechidus, he got back on the train to go back to where his family was staying so they should continue the journey. And he sees ahead of him the Rebbe, the Ramash. The Rebbe had gone on an earlier train than him somehow. And he sees the Rebbe and he says to the Rebbe, what is the Ramash doing here? So the Rebbe told him that the Rebbe Deshvet me geschickt, the Frierdiker Rebbe sent me that I should give chocolate to the children. Now I'm not a betting man. I'm really not a man to take risks. But on this I'll lay a bet. I don't think it happened another time that the Frierdiker Rebbe should send our Rebbe to give little kids chocolate. It happened ain't Sikamol. So there's a story there, and he didn't like the way I repeated it. I told Rabbi Yoel the Maisa about himself. That the Rebbe came and he gave the children chocolate. Officially gave all the kids, but between me and you, the Rebbe Rayatz sent our Rebbe to give chocolate to little kids. This is Reb Yoel Kahn. It's nicht poshet. It's nicht poshet. This is the Rebbe had too many things to do, so he had to have one person who made sure that his Torah is preserved, and that person is Reb Yoel. And all of us really are indebted to him for this more than for anything else. More than, in my opinion, more than anything else. He taught Chassidus to our entire generation. Anybody who understands Chassidus today and learns Chassidus is directly or indirectly a Talmud of Reb Yoel. It's a fact. But the Torah of the Rebbe, which is a whole different world, it's not the typical Chassidus. It's not what they learned on Lubavitch. Is Reb Yoel? There's no question about it. So I bet and that this man was designated to be Deilo. He wrote it on his Matzeva, Deilo, Mashke, Meteres. Anyway, I talk too much. Rabbi Yoel would be very, very unhappy because on top of all of his other milas, the Rebbe wrote about him as a chosn, Hagon, Yerei Shamayim, Obal Midas. Yerei Shamayim, God-fearing, Obal Midas. Rabbi Yoel was a really humble man. Reb Yoel Kahn was a true genius. And forgive me for using these words, in the level of Einstein. A real genius. You never felt, ever, that he felt that he's better than you. Never. He would sit by Chazorah. I went to Chazorah. And he would rattle like a tape recorder. Every once in a while, someone would correct a word. And either it was incorrect or correct. But somebody who worked on this Maimonam said, you don't understand. We argued about words. He said, this word. But who understood? Who understood? The Rebbe started saying Rashi Sichos. It was like a whole new world. It was like Greek. So we argued, did he say Baruch or did he say Bracha, But who understood from the first minute? It was all one man, Reb Yoel. So the Rebbe could trust that his Torah is going to be recorded. Although the Rebbe was not really happy with the built-in book. He didn't want that there should be mefarsim unedited sichos. Now they redid it. And the Rebbe let them use the Gahash temple because the Rebbe feels that they take more acharayis. The Rebbe let them put Gahas. On the Teres Menachem has a seal of Gahas. I remember as a kid, they made a mistake. And they gave out it was called an Esvadas, with a Kahos seal, and the Rebbe made them put a sticker on every volume. It's not Kahos, it's without Achrayas. And then years later, the Rebbe let them put a Kahos stamp on the built-in Mugad de Gesichas. Anyway, Yehi Zichrei Baruch. I'm sorry I got so carried away.